The Powertrain Perspective podcast is sponsored by TranStar Aftermarket Solutions.
Thank you for joining us today for our Transmission Digest Powertrain Perspective. Today we'll be speaking with Bill Hanvey. Bill is the president and CEO of the Auto Care Association, and he's been associated with the automotive aftermarket for many, many years. I think I first met him when he was many years ago at the Luke brand for what is now Schaeffler Group. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks, Bobby. I had a full head of hair back then, and
we both did.
Yeah, no doubt. Good to see you.
And you. Every year the definitive information source for the automotive aftermarket is your association's Auto Care Factbook. And that represents a lot of research. And I haven't yet seen the 2025 version. I understand that it's been published, but I know that last year's was 184 pages of survey information and research results. And it's a fantastic resource for anyone in the aftermarket. Today, I've asked Bill, though, to discuss the state of the aftermarket industry in general and any views he has or research that they have results on that would apply specifically to the transmission repair aftermarket. So take it, Bill.
Bobby, great to see you. As I mentioned before, hi, everybody. Glad that you've joined us. Bobby, the Factbook, I remember the Factbook when it was paper, right? And it's been around for more than 30 years. And when I was a product manager, that was the thing that I always look forward to is getting that and putting it on the corner of my desk. And by the end of the year, it would be dog-eared and beat up. And but it truly is, throughout the course of its progression, has really turned into the industry Factbook, and truly is the source for the industry to learn about the industry, and to use the data to make good business decisions. So we're thrilled that the 25 edition is it's literally on your shelf. If you're a member of the Auto Care Association, log into your account, go to my digital hub, and you'll find the version right there waiting for you. So enjoy the reading. But it's been an interesting couple of months, Bobby. It's been an interesting development with the new administration. But if you'd like, why don't I kind of back up and talk about industry size, industry scope, some things that are on the horizon. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
All right, cool. Well, Bobby, the first thing that I like to do when we're in these types of environments is for the listener or the viewer to really understand the size and the scope of our industry. And not many people do that. People go into work each day. If you're a product manager, you do your spreadsheets, or if you're a counter person, you do your thing. If you're building transmissions, you do your thing. But very rarely does anybody in the industry stop and think about the size and the scope of the industry that we are a part of. And when you think about it collectively, Bobby, our industry is such an economic powerhouse that all of us should be so proud of that industry that we're a part of. So, for example, we've seen significant growth rates over the past 3 or 4 years, upwards of 5, 8, 13%. And we are now a $516 billion industry. And that is in the top 10% of the GDP for the nation. And we contribute more than 2.5% of our nation's GDP. So that's really an amazing statistic in itself. We are an essential service, and we're going back in time to where the pandemic. But I think that was really indicative of the size and the scope and the value of our industry to the economy, is that we're an essential service. So our economy can't function without us. not only are we big, but we employ a lot of people too, Bobby. Nearly 5 million people are employed in the automotive aftermarket, or in the aftermarket itself. And I'm not going to say automotive, because the Auto Care Association, even though we're called the Auto Care Association, we represent all businesses. If it moves, and even if it doesn't move, it's got a motor or an electric motor, we represent it. So these numbers include heavy duty as well. So 5 million employees in our industry, and there's the same amount of people in our industry, or I'm sorry, there's 900,000 technicians in our industry, the same amount of doctors in our country, and we could use about another 150,000 more technicians. The Auto Care Association is really working hard on workforce development to bring new and young men and women into the industry. We have 500,000 locations, Bobby, that pay taxes, that employ people. So the state of the industry is really quite healthy, Bobby. The average age of the vehicle is over 12 years. It's about 12.6 years. We drove over 3 trillion miles last year. So mileage rate is up. Consumers are driving, even though those demographics are changing. How they're driving is different. But the long and the short of it is that we are an economic powerhouse. We're still growing, and there's still room in the industry for efficiency.
And we're lucky in the transmission aftermarket that we don't have a lot of DIY work, do it yourself. It's mostly do it for me. And I wonder what you can tell me about those services for passenger car, light trucks, and a little bit about the fleet, because you mentioned that people's driving habits are different. We all know the fleet is aging as well.
Correct. You know what's interesting, Bobby, especially in the transmission business, there might be some DIY business, but that's quickly converted into DIFM when the consumer that tries to do the job brings it into their local transmission shop. In many cases, in worse shape than when they try to fix it. But overall, the DIY DIFM rate is relatively stable, and especially on the transmission side. And that's what's so attractive to the transmission business, is that the true professionals are doing the work. But overall, the DIFM rate is about 80%. The DIY rate is about 20%. And I mentioned the pandemic before. During the pandemic, obviously, we saw a rise in the DIY rate because people had time and money on their hands, and they said, "Well, I'm gonna change my cabin air filter. I'm gonna go change my brake." So people did take it upon themselves to invest in some of those smaller tools and learn how to do a brake job or a tune-up or an oil change. But they're certainly not doing an R&R on a transmission. That's for sure. So, with the adoption of YouTube, people are finding a tremendous amount of information on the internet to be able to repair their own vehicles. But when we get to transmission, Bobby, I actually did some research. I know that may shock you, but I did some research into transmission using the Factbook that we just talked about. And what's interesting is that transmission repair rates have actually doubled in the for vehicles that are aged new to 10 years old. Transmission replacement rates or repair rates have doubled. So that's great news for our industry on the transmission side. For vehicles with the ages between 11 and 15 years old, the replacement rates increased by 50%. So people are taking a look at the cost of their vehicle and saying, is it worth for me to go and get a remanufactured transmission? Is it worth my time and money to go out and get my transmission rebuilt? And for those vehicles up to 15 years old, it seems like the answer is a resounding yes. But when it gets past that 15 years of age, Bobby, then those replacement rates decline significantly. So the investment of getting your transmission repaired is probably not as worthwhile on those older vehicle as it is on those vehicles up to 15 years old. So that's really encouraging news for this marketplace, that people continually invest and decide to get their transmissions rebuilt. So good news for our industry here.
That's wonderful news. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because I think you and your association are the absolute experts, and everybody has some trepidation, particularly in this segment of the aftermarket, on the emergence of EVs. And obviously, the transmission work doesn't come along with those vehicles. So, but I have heard, you discussed the new administration, that some of that, for a while it looked like we'd have EVs by tomorrow, and they'd be the dominant system for passenger cars and light trucks. That may have slowed down a little bit, and maybe not. You tell us.
It has slowed down significantly, Bobby, and your observations are correct. And look at there's an old expression that you and I are really familiar with in terms of, does the dog eat the dog food, right? And do the consumers embrace EV technology, or don't they? Some do, some don't. But I think with the American consumer, if you're told that you need to buy something, then it immediately raises some red flags. Is EV going to be a player over the next 10, 20, 25 years? Absolutely. And, but still, we showed, Bobby, by the year 2040, still less than half of the vehicle park is going to be EV. Less than half of the vehicle park in the next 15 years is going to be EV. And now, even with some of the adoption that's coming out now, and the supply chain, I think even that is going to be reduced by the year 2030 or 2040. So infrastructure, huge issue. I just saw a report this morning that only 50 fast charging stations have been built federally over the past 2 or 3 years. That obviously is not going to meet the demand as we go forward. So here's our prediction. By 2030, 24 million battery electric vehicles are going to be on the road, of which 15% of them will be 6 years or older. Aftermarket players are going to have to develop, EV-centric type of cataloging, so on and so forth, in order to meet that demand. But it certainly isn't going to be at a lower pace than what was initially forecasted. And I see a longer tail on hybrid vehicles. And not only hybrid vehicles, but the introduction of hydrogen on the commercial vehicle side, which is a real alternative to diesel. Let's give that some time to develop. And I think that that's going to be an interesting development to watch over the next 10 to 15 years. So EVs prevalent on the left coast or the west coast in California. It's prevalent here in DC, in the big urban areas, but certainly not in the more rural environments where there is certainly less charging capacity. So the rumors of the death of the gas-powered vehicle are greatly exaggerated, Bobby.
Well, I think we're all, at least in the transmission aftermarket, we're glad to hear that. One last thing I wanted to discuss with you, and I know you wanted to discuss it as well, and maybe it's what caused you to tear your hair out, and that is the all of the talk recently of tariffs.
Mm-hmm. Well, everybody is aware of the conversation regarding tariffs, but and here's, today it was just announced that a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imported from Canada and imported from Mexico. Obviously, greatly affects the aftermarket. And what we're trying to do with this administration is to communicate to our membership fact in terms of what these tariffs are going to look like and how they affect the industry. So, for example, on the import side, the United States, we import $138 billion worth of automotive parts to this country every year, whether it's for OE production, aftermarket, whatever the case might be. We import 64 billion from Mexico. We import 16 billion from Canada, and we import 11 billion from China. What's interesting is that our exports outweigh our imports on Canada. So that's where we have to watch the retaliatory tariffs to make sure that we're not, biting ourselves with the retaliatory type tariffs. So obviously, a 25% tariff is significant, and at some point, those tariffs will reach the consumer. And, we've done some, I know that this isn't necessarily applicable to the audience that might be listening here. We didn't do a cost analysis on transmission, but we did do one on brakes. So to say that typically a full brake job, Bobby, pad, rotor, caliper on a pair would be between $600 and $1,000. And then what we estimate is after these tariffs, a 25% tariff would go into effect. That would raise the cost of that job from $750 to about $1,200, in that range. So it's going to be significant. So we're keeping our eye on it. Obviously, the administration is using IEPA, EEPA, and that is the government's enforcement agency to incur these tariffs on the economy. So we will keep our powder dry. We'll keep our members informed, but in the meantime, let's just be aware that this is going to be a continual process.
Well, Bill, you know so much and you've shared so much, but we could keep this going probably until the 2026 Factbook gets released. Sadly, we only have so much time, but I so appreciate your information and your thoughts, and certainly the association's research. Do you want to promote a website where people could go and order their own copy of the Factbook or look through the other membership benefits?
Yeah, sure, Bobby. I would be happy to. Just, everybody, if you could just go to autocare.org and go to membership, or if you are a member, just go to your market research page, your My Digital Hub, and you can find all the information there, and happy to talk to anybody about membership. And we've got a great team here at AutoCare. We care about the industry, and anything that we can do to make this industry more efficient, that's what we're all about, Bobby.
Fantastic. Bill, we so appreciate your time today, and thank you for joining Powertrain Perspective.
My pleasure, everybody, and thank you so much for the opportunity, Bobby.